Let's come back to our next presenter, Stephen Mabey. This is a real treat. So Stephen Mabey, he's coming to us from Falmouth, Nova Scotia, and he's the managing director of Applied Strategies. He's not here. He's going to be coming to us from Nova Scotia, but he's the managing director of Applied Strategies. He's a fellow of the College of Law Practice Management and has written a number of books on leading and managing sustainable law firms. It's a real treat because Stephen is hired by some of the biggest firms in this country and smaller firms as well to help them with strategic planning for partnerships, for running the firm, and strategically planning compensation in that firm. So there's a lot of folks out here I know who are thinking about starting a business or currently have a business or looking at expanding a business, joining with other partners. Stephen will give you some insights into how to do that so it's financially feasible. And he's done that for many, many firms over the last 15 years. So he's all about strategy and being clever with how you do this so that it works out for to be a successful endeavor. So with that, I'd like to welcome Stephen.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank everybody for the association inviting me to give me a chance to speak to you. It's a kind of a cross-country tour in the sense I was down facilitating in Atlanta, Georgia the last 2 days, and so now we're talking to folks in BC. So let me jump in. There's a lot of material to cover. Karen has the slide deck that she can turn into a PDF for those folks that want a copy of it, and we're going to try to cover a lot of material in a short period of time, so it may feel like you're trying to drink out of a fire hose, but I'm around next week, and if you got questions and don't get to them today, please don't hesitate to give me a call. I'm happy to chat with people and talk about different aspects. The first thing on all these topics is we tend as a profession to make the simple complex, and I just don't do rocket science. Never have, never will. A lot of this stuff is simple. We just need to make it simple and keep it simple rather than making it too complex. You know, some hard truths that we had to accept is that change is here, and I, still have some clients, and I still have some lawyers I talk to who do the ostrich and stick their head in the sand and hope it's going to go away, but it doesn't, and it won't. And the real truth is, by changing and improving yourself, you do give yourself a second chance. But when people force you, clients or others, it's like being discarded. So make it be your initiative, make it be your idea to make the changes. And obviously, with the recent example of Minden Gross, it's a hard lesson to learn, but learn you will if you choose not to do the change. I always look at change. There's two choices you have with change. You either resist it, or you don't resist it and you embrace it. And it's really, again, that simple. There's no rocket science there. You either choose to understand and make the change work for you, or you do a classic law firm approach, which is let's not embrace it. So we have two topics we want to get to today. We want to talk about strategic issue thinking and planning. I take a different approach to strategic planning because after so many years of watching people not execute it well, in fact, not execute it at all, after spending tens and $20,000 and $30,000 with a consultant to come up with a plan, most of the plans are what I call spots, which is a strategic plan on the shelf. Yes, we have a strategic plan. Can't find it real quickly, but yep, we've done that, been there. So one of the things when you're thinking about your strategic direction, it's not a static document. It's a guidepost. A lot of people got in trouble because they thought once they did one strategic plan, they were done and move away from it. I think good strategic plans are looked at every couple of years, and don't be afraid to tweak it. Small plans, and here's what I differentiate: small plans, which are maybe specific topics for strategy, and big plans are the comprehensive 50-page document that certainly reads well and looks nice but never gets executed. The challenge for you folks is you're busy practicing law. That's how you make your money. That's what you're doing. And so to say we're going to tie you up on these mega strategic planning sessions and draft this 50-page documents, just my experience over time, it just doesn't work. I much prefer to say that strategic thinking is results in smart solutions, and smart solutions, not my cleverness, but specific, measurable, accountable, reachable, time specific, are much more effective than these grandiose large strategic plans. And there's about 4 or 5 reasons why I say that. Rapid change. Things are changing faster, and AI, you just don't have to look past generative artificial intelligence, are changing faster. And so what does a 5-year plan? Well, it's really out of date the day you publish it. And so how do we get a strategy? How do we make that strategy work, whether we're starting a firm, we're trying to continue a firm, or we're growing a firm? We're all affected by this rapid change. And so to me, strategic thinking is much more important than the strategic plan. Strategic thinking also emphasizes our agility. Firms that don't have agility or are bound by multiple partners meetings and multiple management sessions and just multiple of anything aren't going to be agile enough to respond to the changes and to the things that they're seeing. It's interesting. Strategic planning is based on data and experience, and that can restrict your strategic thinking. In other words, well, the data doesn't, do this, or we can't get there. We're going to be bound if we do this. Strategic thinking, it takes one topic, and I'll take you through a very quick exercise, and that it's the illusion of control. The future is unpredictable, and to the extent that you can make sure that you're responsive and agile and be able to respond well, that's great. But you shouldn't be under the illusion that you're necessarily going to control all the possible threats and all the possible opportunities. It's just, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. And one of the things that kills everybody is one size doesn't fit all. I don't do cookie cutter solutions. Somebody said just recently in Atlanta, I was facilitating on a panel, Steve, what's the best strategic plan? And I said, the one that works for your firm. And I wasn't trying to be smart. I'm just saying it doesn't matter what others are doing unless you think that they're doing exactly, they have your values, they have your mission. If that's the case, maybe you need to think about that. But who cares what other firms are doing with their approach? I care about you. I care about your firm. No cookie cutter solution. You have unique strengths and weaknesses. You have weaknesses, but they're unique to you in the sense of build your strategy around those strengths. Play to your strengths. Don't be worrying about what the next door neighbor firm is doing. So strategic planning, like I say, is not strategic issue thinking. There's a real difference here. Strategic planning often spoils strategic issue thinking because it makes your managers and your partners and whoever doing the plan confuse real vision with just the pure manipulation of numbers. So you can plan, we're going to increase revenue by 10%. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. We focus on that, saying, what should our revenue be? Where should we generate our revenue? Forget the 10%. If we're generating the revenue to the best of our ability, that's the increase in revenue. So, I look at strategic issue thinking as flexible, continuous learning, constant reviewing. You don't put it on the shelf. And what I found more effective is I get more of your time to do one-off strategic issues and have the lawyers focus on it, come up with smart solutions, and move forward, than saying, okay, we're going to do all these surveys, we're going to come and we're going to spend a weekend or weeks drafting the strategic plan, which by the time you finish doing the plan, everything's changed and you got to start over again. So I like the idea that we take a list of topics and we say, okay, and I get this is reinforced by recent Thomson Reuters did its first institute of on the 2024 state of the Canadian law firm market. And while disappointing because it doesn't do numbers, unlike our neighbors to the south in England, it did deal with some concepts. So a lot of ironies here. Firms were able to recognize the challenges they faced. They could identify the challenge, articulate it to the nth degree. However, when you said, what are you doing about them? They were planning to address other challenges, not the critical challenges that were facing the firm. The second kind of highlight coming from it was there's a disconnect between how Canadian law firms define success and what they measure. So they will address and say, this is what success will be. Will be success as a firm if we achieve this. And yet they don't choose to measure that progress against those definition of success. So it's kind of like, this will make us successful. This is what we'll say, we are successful, we do this, but we don't measure it. We don't measure to say, are we making progress to what's going to make us successful? And the third highlight from the survey, and you can get the survey, if you can't come across it, just send me an email and I'll send you the report. There's a real gap between the relatively low number of law firms that are reporting key metrics and having adopted metrics and key performance indicators. And let me be sure about this. Everything you measure is not necessarily a key performance indicator. And so you had to be careful to make sure what you're measuring is what you're striving to do as a firm. You know, the theory, the flavor of this is that if you don't have a shared strategy, your comp system is your strategy. So it doesn't matter what you say you want to be as your strategy and the direction you want to go and your vision and your mission. If you don't have a strategy, your comp drives the bus. So here's how I would start any strategic thinking exercise. There are two important things. The vision statement, which is how or why we do it, and organize the values that drive the organization. Let me take a sidestep here. You can go to almost every Canadian law firm website and you'll hear about collegiality, respect, trust, teamwork, all kinds. All of them the same. Rarely do you go into them and see that those values are actually enforced. For me, it's not a value unless I'm prepared to enforce it. So if I say respect is one of my values, and partners or lawyers can go out in the hallway and scream at staff and associates, I'm sorry, I don't believe that respect is one of your values because you don't seem to want to enforce it. The other is the mission statement. What we do defines, the firm's purpose and the measure and how it measures its success. Again, both are important starting points because if these aren't shared, the vision and the mission, then you're going to have as many lawyers as you got practicing law under one roof, but they're silos. And if the goal is to build a firm, a legacy firm, then you've got to make sure that everybody agrees and how and what we do and why we do it. So how do you do strategic issue? Identify the issues. Do your list up. Get a whole list of what are the issues facing us and why we want to look at them from a strategic viewpoint. After you've done that, prioritize it. You can't be willy-nilly, like, you always start with the most important ones and you prioritize those because that's the order in which we're going to tackle them. And then you set a schedule of meeting dates and says that on May 17th, we're going to tackle succession planning, both management succession planning and partner succession planning. And that's the only thing we're going to tackle. We're not going to talk blue sky. We're going to tackle that issue and address that issue. And you had to stick to the priorities of the issue at hand. And listen, we all have partners who will want to bring in red herrings. That's from Nova Scotia. Will bring in red herrings, want us to change it. You had to stick to your priorities and stick to the one item on the table. I use a parking lot, a flip chart. I do retreats, and we're on a specific topic, and then somebody wants to take and divert the attention and the focus, and they're good ideas. I'm not saying that they're not good ideas, but I have this flip chart that I call the parking lot, and I just move them over there and say, hey, that's not our focus right now, but those are good things. We will get to those, but we haven't. Your partners have set an order, and we're going to go through the order. You want to make sure that your strategy or what you're going to do is first in alignment with your vision and mission, because it doesn't make sense to go off in one direction and say, well, this is what we're about. We're a legacy firm, not an ATM. Or we want to do these things. We want to build. We want to build our lawyers and all this. And then all of a sudden, we're doing everything that makes us look like an ATM where partners come in, do the work, take the cash out, and go home. As identified earlier about smart solutions, they need to be smart. They don't need to be rocket science. They don't need to be the most complicated solutions possible. We just need them to be smart. And if they're smart, and we said specific, measurable, accountable, reachable, and time specific. Execution fails in many law firms because of we don't have anybody accountable for the execution. We have these lofty goals that are not practical or realistic, and they're no time specific. Sometime we're going to be this firm. Well, is it this century, next century, this decade, next decade? Many strategic plans you see don't have specific timelines. And then we put it in a communication plan and we say, here, partners, here's what we agreed to, here's what we prioritized, here's our scheduled dates to talk about these topics, and we will keep you abreast of what's going on. Nothing kills strategic plans as quick as nobody knows what's going on. And so how am I going to buy into this if I don't know what's going on? So it's critical that we keep people apprised of where we are, and are we sticking to what we're doing? Again, I reiterate to you, and I love this quote. Basing your actions upon what other firms are doing is like running a race with no finish line, because they change and we're going to have to change. So I really encourage you to stick to your own knitting, saying this is what is success for our firm. This is what will make us successful in our firm. And now we tackle the issues that will make us successful. Always nice to have competitive intelligence, but if you're trying to run your firm like everybody else, that's not really competitive intelligence. That's just saying we're all going to stoop to the same level, which then the bar goes down. SID outcomes, you do want to align your compensation, your values, and your culture, because if any of them are not in alignment, you get what I call the 4 Ds, which is dysfunctionalism, dissatisfaction, disengagement, and disillusion. And there are firms across the country, and Minden Gross is the classic example from Toronto, without picking on any other regions of the country. It's a classic case of where it didn't have to happen if there had been alignment with the values and the culture and having a strategic direction. So, and everybody becomes an expert on disillusion and the collapse of Minden Gross, but irrespective of your perspective on the lessons, there's 2 real strong, significant points that come out. Firms without a strategic direction have a high probability of failure, because how are you successful? You don't know what success is. You don't know when you get there. So it's critical that you have a strategic direction. Doesn't have to be a formal strategic plan. It has to be that the lawyers in the firm are all aligned with, this is the strategic direction that we've chosen, and this is how we're going to get there. And you make it be more flexible. The more flexibility also works with you folks practicing law. To think that, everybody's going to stop and do execute on a 50-page document. It's just not realistic. It's hard enough to get all the lawyers who are involved in the room at the same time. So why do we think that they're going to run out and stop practicing to do a 50-page or 40-page or 30-page document? The second part of the mini gross is if you don't stick to that chosen direction, you have a higher probability of failure. So if we don't have a strategic direction, we have a high probability of failure. And then if we do have a strategic direction and we don't stick to it, we have a higher probability of failure. So it is critical, and like I say, surveys were done. The percentage, this would be back in 2017, 2018, at Minden Gross. If 71% of your equity partners, 75% of your income partners, and 68% of your associates don't know what the strategic direction of the firm is, guess what? You're never going to get come out of the desert. You're just going to circle around every oasis in the desert, not knowing where you're going and what you're doing. So I again say to you, utilizing your time. A lot of small firms, you get only so much time to do this stuff. Strategic thinking issues, I think, allows you to maximize your time, get the strategic direction, focus on what's really critical to your success, and make sure that you have smart plans to execute and to move that along. But it doesn't have to be the great Canadian novel. It just has to be, here's what our priority of issues, here's what we're doing for each of these issues to achieve success. People are going to be accountable. What's the timeline? And move on. I think it maximizes your chance of success. And listen, I think the odds of success for many firms has decreased because they're not just keeping up with the times. Whether it's they can't attract the lawyers, young lawyers that they want, they can't get the financial rewards that they want. Whatever. It's just more challenging to run a law firm. But successful law firms are out there, and they're killing it, and they're doing very well financially, but they're also doing very well culturally, and they can see that they're leaving a legacy, and partners try to leave the firm better, in a better position than when they came in. And if everybody keeps doing that, obviously those firms will thrive and survive. So that's kind of the 30-second approach on strategic plan. Yes, I have clients that still hire me and want to do the strategic plan, and so you work with the client because the client's always right. But I would say to you that I've seen more success with people who tackle strategic issues and particularly where smaller, mid-sized firms where they may not have the resources internally to do all the things. Tackle what's important, the partners have prioritized, and if you stick to it, you're getting, I think you'll be very successful. Great compensation systems drive the firm's desired behavior. That's the problem with so many compensation firms. The behaviors that we wanted came afterwards or have changed, and that's legitimately changes. But the old compensation systems that people were using don't necessarily match the needs of the current legal market. So two characteristics of all compensation systems: they've got some subjectivity and some objectivity. Some are totally subjective, some are totally objective. But those are the two key issues. And so firms, when they're looking at the comp, and it is probably maybe the number 2 projects that I'm working on are compensation systems, because compensation systems shouldn't be static, whether it's every 2 to 3 years. I saw recent polling numbers down in Atlanta where the vast majority of them were looking at their comp systems between 2 and 3 years. Second was 3 to 5 years, but nobody was going beyond 5 because the market has changed so much. The demands of your partners have changed so much. It's just going to be compensation, whether it's compensation for associates or compensation for partners. And so it was kind of split, which was interesting. Firms, maybe half of the respondents were moving to a little bit more subjective, but half were moving back to objective. And part of the drive for objective is if you have millennial partners, they are more specific and data driven than some of us old people that are still haunting firms. It clearly, they want to know, and transparency comes with objectivity, not subjective criteria. If you think about it, if I know exactly how you're calculating all this stuff, it's transparent, but I have to understand how you calculate, rather than say we have 2 wise people or 3 wise people, and they set comp and everybody's happy and everybody gets the appropriate value for their contributions to the partnership and so on and so forth. You're going to find a lot of your younger partners coming up not as comfortable with that as some people that are around. So, it just forms an interesting table, that says, okay, if we're adjusting compensation, means that we're moving lockstep or equal division, more formula versus comparative worth, subject to with formula bonuses. I mean, these are the kinds of major blocks that you look at if you're moving either towards objective or subjective criteria. But I want to stop and say, everybody's comp system should be different, should drive the behaviors that their firm wants to see in the order that their firm wants to see. And so it's critical that, if, yes, oh, so-and-so has a great comp system, we should just copy that. No, maybe you'll copy parts of it because that works for you too. But really, compensation, the best compensation systems are the ones that work for your firm. That's the best compensation system, and that's why partners and people need to be involved. Having said that, there's no question over time, consultants and sometimes that's a dirty word, but people who work with comp systems have generally come to the conclusion there are about 7 major fundamental compensation systems. People tweak them, do modifications to them, but in real life, there are 7 basic comp systems that you'll see, and not advocating any particular one because your firm may do better with one versus another. I'm just saying they give you a starting point and say, okay, well, we kind of like this one, but we want to tweak it and do some things different. But it's just really should be a guidepost, not a hitching post. You shouldn't hitch your compensation and say we're not going to change anything. So just going through quickly. All right, here you go. Equal partnership. Well, that don't have to be rocket science to understand that they just split the profits equally among the partners. Lockstep. This is a seniority-driven compensation system, which means every year that you're in the system, you probably get an increase, or every couple of years. But basically, it rewards solely on seniority. So if the firm is making more money, I go up a year, I get it. It's almost like, if you think about it, what we do with associates. We give them an increase every year as they progress and become a longer stay at the bar. The modified hail and door, a lot of people have modified it. They have 3 categories which partners can earn income. The finder, so they have origination for clients. The minders, where they might be responsible for the client, and the work they do themselves. Those are the 3 buckets that get added together, and then your percentage is taken of the total firm's percentage or the firm's total, and that's your percentage of the income. So it says origination, it says there's sometimes when you're minding clients, and clearly your own personal work fee credits, whatever euphemism you use in your firm. Simple unit, it kind of rewards seniority, production, client generation, non-billable activity, and it's pretty straightforward. It's how many units, what is, and how many units do you have, and here's what the value of a unit is, and you just move on from there. Some systems, and its lack of creativity, 50-50 subjective objective is basically saying 40% of the partner's income is based on actual billings, and 10% is based on actual client generation statistics. And then 50% of your income is based on perception of how you have matched up against um, the criteria that the firm has set for partners' compensation. Very subjective, and causes a lot of confusion and chaos because we would value each partner's subjective contributions differently. Well, why did Susie or Bobby get more of that 50% and less for me? And it can be very disruptive. And you know, my experience in most comp systems, the trouble comes not because I'm not happy with my own individual compensation, but it's the relativity to my partners. Well, why are they getting more, or why did they get valued different, or things like that. And a lot of firms have done away with small differences because nothing irritates. Why did Susie get $1,500 more a year, or $1,500 less a year than me? You know, the gaps need to be wider. So number 6 is team building, and this is basically, you know, it says we're trying to build a team. We're the opposite of a eat what you kill system. You know, bases 50% of the partners comp solely on how well the firm does, and then 40% based on their practice group or department. So it kind of says we're a firm first, then we're going to be part of your practice groups, and only 10% on your performance. So, you know, and the scary thing here is only 10% of your performance, so I guess I don't perform, but my practice group does really well, or the firm does really well. You can see where some inequities can grow in such a system, or people, not anybody in this audience would take advantage of it, but there might be lawyers out there who would take advantage of that situation. And then there's everybody knows about eat what you kill, solely based on your individual efforts, no recognition for anything other than personal production. None of the firm-oriented things, investment time. I don't like using the non-word, so I don't say non-billable, but investment time, whether it be in mentoring, whether it be in developing practice areas, making the firm become iconic out there with potential clients. But clearly it doesn't value any of those things. It's just how much work have you done for me today? And there have been some very successful firms in the past. Those firms I call ATMs. Partner comes in, does the work, takes the cash, and leaves. Not interested in necessarily leaving in a better place when they leave. Not interested in necessarily bringing people along because it's a disposable resource, and they'll just get more associates if they need them to do the work. So it has a lot of negatives, but it's worked. And as one Asian partner says, yeah, we're eat what you kill, but we hunt in packs. And you say, yeah, okay, I hear you, and that's cute, but it's still an eat what you kill system, and it doesn't necessarily develop collaboration, teamwork, or congeniality. There are 4 critical parameters. I don't care how you build your system, and I'll come to a simple way to build your system, but there are 4 parameters that you really need to keep your thinking within kind of the boundaries and say, okay, there's no magic system that will satisfy all partners. In fact, I think a successful comp system if everybody's a little bit unhappy, and it meets all the strategic goals, and it'll never need to be changed. Comp systems should be reviewed, I think, every 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 years, but in the current environment, maybe quicker or sooner. But they need to be reviewed because they shouldn't be static. They need to be responsive to both the market, industry, the firm's needs, where the firm's at, things like that. It can only be created, and this is critical. I can't come in, you shouldn't let me come in and say, oh, here's your comp system, and then walk out. The comp system needs to be openly discussed, the strengths and weaknesses. The partners or the people who are making the decision need to be the ones making the shot. I always say, it's not my comp system when I walk out the door, it's yours. So you better make it be yours, and you better understand it. I laugh person who didn't like me, I think, at the start, but didn't like consultants at the start, gave me this analogy and says like a seagull flying in from afar, circles around the head, drops something white in their hands. They thought it was a report. Only the seagull had disappeared from sight did they discover that what it was. It's true. It's kind of like, yes, you provide objective outside third-party opinions and can be helpful, but in the final analysis, comp system, strategic direction, everything, it's yours. It has to be yours. Otherwise, you're going to fail. We'll both fail. I will have left you totally dependent on me, which is not a good thing. I'm getting older, but you need to own, be it a comp system, be it your strategic direction, whatever. I can't say this enough, and I know some people get offended by it, but I don't care. We tend to make the simple complex, and that blurs transparency, that blurs what motivates me and what incentives I have to do what. You just need to keep it simple. It's got to be, if a partner can't figure out how their comp system works, you're doomed to failure, because they're then going to just go off and do the behaviors they think should be rewarded, not necessarily the behaviors that the firm wants to reward. They'll just do their own. You have to keep it simple. It doesn't need to be complex. And I just can't iterate that enough to you, because I've seen, and for whatever reason, I passed the CA exam. I've seen comps. I was having a hard time trying to figure out where they get the numbers from. And I think I'm not reasonably intelligent, but normal, average intelligent. And I could not figure out how they were pulling the numbers together. It's just, it doesn't need to be that complex, and you should be able to, and it should be, if it's not aligned with your strategic goals, then the comp system is the strategic goals. There should be alignment between, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to get there, and this is what we're prepared to pay to get there. And then all of a sudden, for example, if you say, part of our success is we're really going to mentor our associates. We're going to develop iconic young lawyers and bring them up through, and this is what we're going to do. And if the comp system doesn't align with that, then partners are not dumb. They're going to take the message and say, you say that, but you don't reward that. And so why would I spend my time doing that if I'm not going to get paid for it, or not going to get compensated for it? Altruism and sense of teamwork, or certainly altruism, took a hit with COVID. We lost some of our social contact. We lost some of our conversation or communication skills. And so it really is quite important that you make sure that what we reward gets done. And that's the basic, and it doesn't matter, it's just not law firms. What gets rewarded gets done. If you got kids, what gets rewarded gets done. If you don't reward it, guess what? Slim and none chance that they're going to do it. So it's about behaviors that you want to reward. That's what your comp system should do. What are the behaviors you want to reward? And then make sure that your comp system rewards it. So it's not rocket science. Again, I don't do rocket science. So I have a two-step approach. We identify, and on the list here is, I'm sure you can add to it, we identify the behaviors that you possibly could want the firm to drive. And then we say to the partners, you go in and weigh them, 1 to 10. Again, not any great skill here, but here are some of the behaviors that you might want to. And we say, all right, prioritize them. Everything can't be a 10. You really do have to think about what makes sense for our firm, and again, in line with the strategic direction that you want to take. And so you go through and you prioritize them and say, okay, here's the behaviors that we want to drive, and okay, we've got that. We pulled together all the lawyers or the partners' responses. We get a weighted average and say, here are the top 5 or 6 or 7 behaviors. And that's your step one. Very simple. Piece of paper, send it out to the partners, say prioritize these. If you have some other behaviors that are not on the sheet that I use, you add those, and then you send them through and get it prioritized and get it weighted. So far, not a rocket science exercise. The second one is, we want to look at our current comp system and say, what does our current comp system drive? So if in other words, if the behavior that we said is number one, the highest weighted value, and we can't say whether our comp system currently drives that, wow, we got a problem, because if at the fourth column, and those are the column headings, and the partners have said these are the top 3 or 5 or 6 important behaviors, and our current comp system doesn't support those or reward those, then we've got some wholesale changes we got to make. Now, on the other hand, if there's a bunch of 1s and 2s and 3s, which means we can say what our comp system supports these behaviors, we might do some tweaking, but we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not going to have to do wholesale changes. But critical to this step 2 is you can't just tell me that your comp system, oh, your comp system supports mentoring or community investment or things like that. You had to tell me, how does your comp system reward that? I know you believe that it supports it, but tell me. And if you can't articulate how it supports it, then that behavior, then I'd say probably odds are it doesn't support it. So here's the reality. The gaps between poor records and execution in law firms is just terrible because you're busy practicing law. Nobody said in law school you had to also run a business. Will increase the risk of failure to unacceptable. Remedial action on the part of the firm's leadership and partners in general is imperative. You've got to make sure there's an alignment between values and culture and compensation and strategic direction. If there's anything out of sync, it's like a 4-legged stool. If one leg is not steady or shorter than the other 3, it rocks. It doesn't necessarily provide the support. So, one of the questions you ask yourself, is your compensation system we're following? Does it drive the behaviors that you want? So here's my last real message. And I used this down in Atlanta earlier this week when somebody says, well, Steve, what's the best way to increase profitability? And I said, well, there's all kinds of simple little things I can tell you about, but here's the truth. The way that you increase profitability, the way that you get the best comp system, the way you get the best strategic direction is you got to have courage. And sometimes that's in short supply in law firms. You got to have the courage to have challenging discussions with partners and others. You got to make some tough decisions. Having had those discussions, you should never make a decision that you haven't sat and talked to people and understood, the flavor. And the last one, where we really fall down, is the execution of those decisions made. You do that, you have the courage to do that, you will be a firm that thrives and survives and does very, very well. The firms that are falling behind and all that don't have the courage. Well, I know they're underperforming, and there, but by the grace of God go I. And so therefore, you don't have the courage to make those decisions.
I find one of the challenges with our comp model is what might work for litigators may not work for solicitors. And have you seen that with any of the firms that you've worked with? And what do you recommend? Like, should we be considering slightly different compensation models depending on solicitor, litigator, PI?
I've seen, because one of the issues is the litigator and the corporate person, they do the billings and they see the revenue, whereas PI can be 2, 3, 5 years, whatever time frame that before you start to see the collections and the money come in on those works. And so what do? Pay them nothing during the interim? That probably will work well and drive people away. So I've seen people say, here's the base. Everybody is a partner, and there are certain obligations of ownership and behaviors that we want. And then they've actually then said, okay, but we recognize that the billable hour folks over here, whether it be litigation or corporate, we'll work with them, and their part of their comp will come pretty mathematically out of some of the objective criteria. And then they look at the PIs, and what I've seen is basically some recognition that they're moving stuff along. But it seems to me that once the PI starts flowing, then it becomes an easier task to say, okay, here's your billings or collections for this period of time. But most of them have had to try to figure out what do we do with PI. And example, a firm that's pretty famous for it in Toronto says, here's our comp system, and the personal injury people, even class action, say, well, that's really not fair to us. But what they've done is they've said the first 50% of any of that PI or class action stuff that comes in gets directed towards the partners or partner who did it. Then 25% goes to the practice group, the PI practice group partners to split, and then 25% goes to the pool for the other partners. So they've tried to say, you know, like, so you're maybe every second year is a bonanza, but you know, you're going to get 50% of what we pull in on that. The other partners in the practice area are going to get 25%. I think these are the numbers, and then 25% goes to the pool, because you know, during that period of time, the litigators and the corporate folks are kind of underwriting the firm and underwriting some of the draws to the PI firms. So yes, you can't, it's not a cookie cutter solution. Like, you can't say we're doing the billable hours or the collections, and you know, you guys may have years in which you get nothing. Well, you can't live on nothing.
And I find that the use of resources that's one of the battles that we encounter, is a solicitor's practice tends to use more resources than a litigator's practice. So when costs are shared evenly, sometimes we get a little bit of, yeah, not everybody likes that.
Well, you're right. I mean, I remember corporate in my days being an administrator, COO at Stuart McKelvey. I remember the corporate said, well, we don't need a library. We don't use the library. It's those litigators that use the library. You know, their overhead should reflect that. We shouldn't have to pay for the, and at some point in time, you stop and say, are we a firm, or are we silos practicing under the same roof? Because if we're a firm, there's always going to be some things that you don't think you use, and some things that they think you use, and you know, you got to get beyond that, because you can get lost in the weeds, trying to say, oh, okay, you know, you get 1/10 of this, and you don't get charged for this, and it's just, are we a firm, and are we one firm? And these are the things we need to support our practices that we've agreed to have as practice. Now, if you've got some partners out there doing some practices that nobody's agreed to, well, that's a different story. But if we've agreed as a firm, we're going to do litigation, corporate, and PI, then, you know, for me, a base level is we support that. As long as the partners made the decision we're going to offer those services, then I don't think you want to get too busy, you know, trying to separate the chaff from the wheat.
Thank you.
Stephen, I got a question for you. My name's Asim. I heard you in your discussion here, you talked about legacy planning, and obviously you've been working with firms and whatnot, and you see a bit of what happens. I'd say in the last 10 years, I've noticed, just from my observations of other lawyers, there's a lot of jumping around that's happening in our local market. I'm dealing with a lawyer on a file today at one firm, and then suddenly I get a notice that they've left, and I locate the lawyer on Google at a different firm. First of all, are you noticing the same trend, that there's sort of no loyalty, it seems, these days?
Well,
but even then, tying that into the next point is, you know, you talk about legacy planning. I'm a bit older now, and I look at, you know, the next generation and who I'm leaving my firm and any goodwill that I may have, which might be limited, to, you know, how do we work on getting that structured this day and age, when the issue of loyalty in my mind is, I think it's lost on this next generation?
Well, you know, and I was down about 115 managing partners the last couple of days, and would echo that. But I guess I take a little different spin. Yes, they don't seem to want to practice law the way that you practice law, and yes, they are more focused on their social contract with the firm. But here's the thing. Somebody has to change, and it's not going to be them. We have come to the conclusion they're not going to change, so we had to change. But one of the things that I lay at, and it's unfair of me to say this to you, but I lay at your doorstep and other partners like you, is we have stopped institutionalizing in their minds what the firm is about. It wasn't that long ago, a few years, when every Friday you might show up for beers. People got some of the legends of the firm, and they talked about what was going on and all that. We stopped doing that. The question I asked one of my managing partner groups Thursday was, when's the last time you had your young lawyers and their significant others to your house for dinner? Dead silence. And so I said, well, loyalty comes, what's the simple basic of loyalty? It's making me feel like I'm part of a team, like you got my back, like you care about me more than just generating revenue for you. Like all those things go into creating the loyalty bond. And I think as firms, broad stroke, I would say this, across Canada, but across the United States, across North America, we have stopped making them feel like they are part of a team, making them feel that loyalty, making them feel that they're part of something of a bigger than themselves, and they should be excited about it. We still do the mushroom approach. I have law firms who tell me, oh, I don't share any information with my associates. Well, I said, how do you know if they want to stay? How do they know if they want to stay? Why wouldn't they go someplace that says, quarterly we'll meet with you. We'll talk about what the hurdles are. We're not going to give you individual partners' incomes or anything. I'm not suggesting that in the slightest. But you can talk about the successes of your firm, and that makes me feel like two things. One, I want to be here. But secondly, I belong. They trust me with this. They want me to be part of the team. And so I understand the concern about loyalty, and I have senior partners who say, Steve, it just drives me nuts to look out the window and those guys are going to the gym at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I hear you. They're different, but we don't have to be in the office on Saturday morning to prove that we're working anymore. Lots of people work from home, but we just, we look in the mirror and we should say we had to change because they've proven they're not going to change. They'll get up and leave. You make them unhappy, they just get up and leave. May not have another job, but they'll still get up and leave. So we had to do some more things if we want to create that legacy firm. Here's my line to you. If you want to get paid out your capital when you leave, then you got to have some partners coming behind you. And if you want some partners coming behind you, then you have to learn how to work with them differently. And listen, I just did a interview of 18 associates for a firm, a client, in 3 groups of 6, and I was bleeding at the mouth because when they told me, well, they're violating their social contract. This is not and I'm thinking, social contract. Okay, like let's boil this down. You're practicing law. You have clients you serve. If there's work there, you do the work. If there's not work, that's not your fault. But let's get a little bit away from this social contract and say, why am I here? Why do I want to stay here? What are the positive things about being here rather than the negativity that our comp doesn't match Toronto's comp? You go on and you just say, no, loyalty is a two-way street. We want you to be loyal. They want you to grow. They want you to be part of this firm and all that. But you had to come part way too. And part of the issue is we have recruiters who have created the talent wars to their own best interest.
Thanks very much, Stephen, for coming and joining us today. And everyone give Stephen a round of applause.